Black identity extremists, now considered a domestic terror threat by the FBI. The Bureau releasing an explosive new report claiming police officers are being targeted by people who perceive racial injustices. The FBI says the 2014 shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, spawned the threat against cops. Brown's death also sparking violent riots across the country.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Black identity extremists. What are we talking about?
So, I mean, that's the question. What are we talking about? Because it appears to be a very arbitrary designation. And so if you read the report, they talk about people who have an animus toward police, who are motivated by what they perceive as racial grievances, but there is no connection to an organization or to a kind of ideological leader figure or cult figure. And then they say that they're worried about some of these individuals being radicalized by the sovereign citizen movement. But then they later in the report say that there's no evidence that there's actually any interaction or connection with the sovereign citizen movement. So at the end of it, it seems as if the report exists solely to create a kind of language, an umbrella that you can arbitrarily use for all sorts of purposes, very many of which would likely be surveillance of African-American activists.
And isn't there a big difference that there was a lot of violence in the 60s and 70s, and while there was assassinations of African-American leaders, there were also unrest incidents. There were also riots. Right now, as someone who covers law enforcement issues, most of that has been on the hate crime side of white supremacist groups and these rallies and the disappear the Jews and all of the Charlottesville. We're not seeing any imbalance. So how do you account for that?
No, there's been a great deal of lethargy around this. And if you remember, one of the things that activists have pointed out, even going back to what happened in Charleston in 2015, is that there was no designation of Dylann Roof's actions as terrorist.
So how do you account for that?
No, there's been a great deal of lethargy around this. And if you remember, one of the things that activists have pointed out, even going back to what happened in Charleston in 2015, is that there was no designation of Dylann Roof's actions as terrorist. There was no designation of Dylann Roof's actions as terrorist.
There was no designation of Dylann Roof's actions as terrorist.
And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is identity extremists, now considered a domestic terror threat by the FBI.
In America, black people are treated very much as the Vietnamese people or any other colonized people, because we're brutalized. The police in our community occupy our area, our community, as a foreign troop occupies territory. And the police are there not to, in our community, not to promote our welfare or for our security and our safety, but they're there to contain us, to brutalize us and murder us, because they have their orders to do so. And just as the soldiers in Vietnam have their orders to destroy the Vietnamese people, the police in our community couldn't possibly be there to protect our property, because we own no property. They couldn't possibly be there to see that we receive the due process of law, for the simple reason that the police themselves deny us the due process of law. And so it's very apparent that the police are only in our community, not for our security, but the security of the business owners in the community, and also to see that the status quo is kept intact.
People aren't hip to that yet. They're not really aware of it. They know some shit's going on in this country somewhere. But a lot of people out there don't know where it's at. They think it's the black people doing it, you dig? That all those riots are causing my life to be miserable in all areas, you know. And they really haven't focused in on the fact that it's the pigs and their mentors, the people who control the pigs, the power structure, those bald-headed businessmen at the Chamber of Commerce, you see? They're not turned on to that power structure. They just know that life is becoming increasingly miserable for everybody. But when they find out who it is that's causing the trouble, and who it is that's making life miserable, and who it is that's responsible for all their sons being murdered in Vietnam, when they get tuned into that, then they're all going to be just like the Panthers, because this is what we're tuned into. We see what's going on, and it's just a terrible, foul situation. More and more people are turning on to that, you see. So I think that they're going to do the dog right here in Babylon.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male minorities, 15 to 25. That's true in New York. It's true in virtually every city. And that's where the real crime is. You've got to get the guns out of the hands of the people that get killed. So you want to spend the money, put a lot of cops in the street, put those cops where the crime is, which means in the minority neighborhoods. So it's one of the unintended consequences is people say, oh my God, you are arresting kids for marijuana that are all minorities. Yes, that's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why do we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them. And then they say, oh, I don't want to get caught, so they don't bring the gun. They may still have a gun, but they leave it at home.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
President, do you still think there were very fine people on both sides in Charlotte? Well, I've answered that question, and if you look at what I said, you will see that that question was answered perfectly.
You're putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane.
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is. Very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. There's Lee right there.
This event has been declared an unlawful assembly. You're to leave the immediate area or you will be arrested.
Up and down.
You will not replace us! You will not replace us! You will not replace us! Anti-white! Anti-white! Anti-white!
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
In 2000 and 2016, the white supremacists were responsible for more homicides than any other domestic extremism movement. Now, I see the distinction you're making, homegrown versus domestic. But let me ask you, can you quantify either one of them for us?
Well, in terms of number of arrests, we have, through the third quarter of this fiscal year, had about, give or take, 100 arrests in the international terrorism side, which includes the homegrown violent extremism.
This year?
This year. But we've also had just about the same number, again, don't quote me to the exact digit, on the domestic terrorism side. And I will say that a majority of the domestic terrorism cases that we've investigated are motivated by some version of what you might call white supremacist violence.